tell you something. When I close my eyes, a whole universe opens up. A whole universe opens up. As big and as rich as the one outside, and ever expanding. for this big light all of a sudden. Ciao. Živijo. If it is okay, če je okay z vsem, bi jaz govorila rada v angleščini. Okay. Za tiste, ki mogoče malo rabite prevod, je ena QR koda bila od zunaj, tako da si lahko imate prevod. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing your Sunday evening with us. My name is Dragana, and together with my colleagues, we have been working for some time already on a project that we call kinesthetic empathy. It's also called magic, but we maybe prefer to call it kinesthetic empathy in dance. And somehow I think what you will see tonight is some kind of presentation of certain materials that we worked on and where we arrived at and how it goes. So maybe from my side, the initial desire or need was somehow to take back the idea of perception or how we use perception today, to take it back from some very superficial levels that we all witness these days. Maybe advertising levels or some kind of really, really superficial ones, and to take it back and to work with it in artistic research, but also maybe partly scientific research. And I think I was working with the idea of movement and perception, I think since a very long time. I remember that in maybe around 18 years ago, I was studying philosophy, and Rock Weber gave me one book called The World of Perception by Merleau-Ponty, and he said maybe you can use some ideas from this book. So I did, and this is where this maybe initial ideas or initial drive came from. So I started learning both in theoretical way, but also in the studio, about this really vast space of perception and decision-making based on perception. Maybe this was also the time when I started questioning some kind of binary relations between hermetic and accessible, between what is concrete and abstract, between what is subjective and objective, so that all of this for me still is very interesting and I use it a lot. And also how to work with it in a practical way, how to work with it in a studio situation. What does all of this mean for these concrete people working in a studio? And then maybe some 10 years later I read a book by Susan Lee Foster called Choreographing Empathy. And in this book she is really somehow dissecting three concepts or three notions of empathy, of choreography, and kinesthesia. And she's doing this in a very academic, very scientific way. So I wanted to take some of her ideas or maybe her viewpoints to bring them again back to the studio. And this is how this project evolved. We call it magic. So in order not to create some kind of magic or make believe on the stage, but rather to render what already is there more present or more visible or more prone to work with. And maybe it's also good to say that we start always from the somatic work, so the work with the body and from the body, and then in some kind of layers it evolves and it goes on, maybe through theory or through other media as well. So what you will witness today is also our work with the body, but also with the body of sound, with the body of words, with the body of images, and so on. So we somehow understand that there is a problem with the body today. We have, all of us, some kind of problem with the body, with different kinds of bodies. And we decided to take this as a starting point, or as an initial step. Last year we organized another kind of performance here in the same space in Stara Elektrarna, and we called it Pridite bliže, Come Closer. And this year, for various reasons, we decided to organize material in a different way, in different kind of symphony, as the title says. So putting together different sources of material, or different kinds of material. And also it's called Unfinished Symphony because, in a way, for me, this kind of work never really can be finished, or we can never really be satisfied with it. In a way, the somatic principles that we use are used in such a way that they are applied in every other situation, both working with our body in the studio, but also on all other levels, so that the same seed or the same principle is used in different situations or with different kinds of materials. And we have been also very busy with ways of watching dance, because we understand that dance is something that you watch with your eyes, but we were interested in the idea of watching dance with your whole body. So and even not only physical body, but also whole our experience, or our whole being, or everything that we are. How can we watch something being present as a whole, not only being partly present? Because we understood, or maybe I understood, that I always have to leave parts of myself somewhere. When I attend something, when I am present somewhere, that I always have to leave certain parts of myself, and I was trying to imagine or to create situations where we are all welcome and adequate as whole. Last year we also offered or invited the audience to watch with their eyes closed, which they also did, some of them. So there is this idea that we can watch with different parts of body or with the whole body, but we can also watch with our eyes closed. What happens when we close our eyes while we are watching dance? What kind of dynamics, what kind of relation is created then? And we are also trying to understand what, obviously you all know that in dance we repeat movements forever. We repeat all the time different movements so that we are more precise. And we try to create a different kind of platform to be precise in relation to something else. To be precise not in relation to learned movements or repeated or maybe to be in unison or something like that, but how can we create different other platforms where we can be precise in relation to something else other than mechanical precision. I remember also the work of, while speaking about watching dance, there was a project by Croatian collective BETCO called Responsibility for the Things Seen, in which I think it was also here in Ljubljana, in Axioma, maybe around 10 years ago. And the Responsibility for Things Seen was the project where they addressed the audience and asked somehow the audience to be responsible together with them for what they see. And I think in this kind of way, we are shifting back or trying to put back the responsibility for the things seen again on us, on dancers. Because if we don't take for granted, if we take seriously this idea that we can watch with our whole body or with our whole experience, what is the kind of dance then that we should dance? How does this idea influence the dance, and what kind of dance then we should have? And maybe just two last things. I believe that in our Western culture, dance is quite wrongly considered ephemeral. You know this idea that dance is ephemeral, and we all know this idea. It exists and then it doesn't exist. When the dancer stops dancing, it's finished. So I think in this work and in this kind of work, I really want to affirm or to research or to question or to challenge this idea, because I believe it's not really ephemeral, and I believe it leaves traces, it leaves impact, so that something also stays. There was also an aspect of this work, or a whole chapter of this work, that relates to our bodies as archives, because we have archives all over. We have documents of dance, we have writings on dance, photos, videos, etc. And maybe this work also tries to affirm the body as art, as a living, growing, changing, transforming kind of archive. So maybe I can share with you short thoughts from Franz Anton Kramer, who is our colleague from Berlin. And he says, with the current restructuring of the cultures of knowledge, the body has been rediscovered as a seat of memory, because sensory, emotional, and cognitive experiences are stored in movements, gestures, and rhythm. So he argues that the body is not just a physical entity, but a vessel of knowledge, where materiality of the body becomes an accumulation of documents, so to speak, which in combination can suggest meanings that refer to more than mere physical activity, but also hold the possibility of referring back to traces of knowledge stored in the body. So we were trying to work with this idea in practice. What does this mean? When one body as archive meets another one. And he suggests that dancers use this embodied knowledge not only to perform physical actions, but also to document and express meanings, making the body an active medium for both personal and cultural expression. This concept of the body as archive is not limited to dancers alone, but can extend to all practitioners of movement and beyond, suggesting that the body, across different movement practices, serves as a dynamic archive of both personal and collective knowledge. So for me, the spaces we are creating are based in uncertainty and learning for everyone involved, rather than clear spaces of some kind of produced certainty. And I assume that and wish for content that will bring us all somewhere without being able to exactly predict where it will bring us. And maybe through all these examples, I also arrive at the level of production of art or artworks. And I wish to inspect what are the reasons that make such a wide, horizontal, inclusive, and non-hierarchical area of dance practice into a potentially and wishfully sellable and successful and therefore hierarchic product. What is sacrificed in this making, and how could it be otherwise? What is the relation between process and product, between research and presentability, between how the work feels from within and how we think it looks from the outside? Would it be productive, and how could we invest in untangling the misunderstandings about the subjective and objective, about the hermetic and the accessible, and about the abstract and the concrete? In the end, I'm interested in the dance that can be listened to and not only watched.
I started working as a dance critic a few years ago and only later as a theater critic. And I cannot help but notice that these are two quite different formats with quite different potentials. Theater, besides other things, serves as a vehicle for classical texts and cultural knowledge. Both dance and theater start from the body, but dance is more intrinsically bodily, since bodies are always implied in dancing, but not in theater. Certainly, as we will see, dance and the body have served other functions in the past, and still do, functions correlated with the laws of correctness, uprightness, righteousness, and moral superiority. But an almost 100-year-long period of modern conceptions of body and dancing has now taught us that dance is, more than anything else, intrinsically space-bound, and that space and body could be thought of as two sides of the same coin, a centrifugal and a centripetal force, so to speak. There is also a sort of freedom of interpretation in dance that I rarely see in the theater. Modern forms of dance are not as suggestive as modern forms of theater. Might be because words are rarely used in dance pieces, and if they are used with much caution. Speech and language are gross contextualizers. They are very strong magnets for the organization of matter and thought. A theater piece wants to produce a certain effect in me, but what if I would like the freedom of feeling a different kind of effect, one that is not clearly foreseeable, or one that doesn't make me decide between 2 or 3 options, one I can get lost and swim in? Or what if I would like to experience no effect whatsoever? I also spent an earlier portion of my life as a tennis player and then as a tennis coach, and from there I got interested in the way we learn with our bodies. I got acquainted with the fact, often cited in developmental psychology, that children, when they acquire movement or language, rarely directly imitate the movement or the sound of the other person, but usually follow the goal. They might reference only some contours of the movement while actually producing a whole new movement, a novelty, as a sort of refraction or sometimes an upgrade of the original movement. That's how language evolution happens. In that aspect, pedagogy of movement is much different than pedagogy of mental concepts and information. Concepts and information can be treated as simple inputs, while movement is inherently tied to a certain goal and to a certain reference to the other. The middle case of this is philosophy, which is, in my opinion, itself an embodied discipline. As a tennis player, for a long time I didn't develop a strict technique, but copied everyone else's, which is actually a great way of learning, but gives you barely any stability. At some point, when I was older, I could sense that there is also some other way of conceiving play. Playing from the inside, staying with yourself, staying internally regulated, but also tuned to the other person's movements for the sake of being able to predict them and properly react to their consequences. The main premise of my master's thesis, which I presented last year and planned it about a year before Dragana invited me to join this project, was that psychology is always somehow conditioned by ethics, and that therefore we cannot speak of a pure scientific psychology, nor of a purely individualistic psychology, nor establish a strong case for the superiority of one set of pop psychological principles for another. Conduct towards others, that is essentially embodied, has always been understood as an important foundation or even prerequisite for the recognition of self. There was a concept of public space which supported public gatherings and public conversation. Nowadays, we seem to want to define ourselves completely positively, transcendent to every conversation or relation, as this or that or something else completely. But can we not think back to a certain situation and find that we usually define ourselves, especially when trying to explain our actions and ourselves to others? At its very conception, psychology wasn't conceived as a science of depths, but as a science of perception. Even though there definitely are depths to our relation with one another, we first stumble upon the other, or otherness, on the surface. My thesis is based on a comparative conceptual analysis of 4 embodied terms: feeling, perception, attention, body. Embodied terms often overlap with one another. For example, what is the difference between feeling and perception, between feeling and empathy? In classical epistemology, which is heavily prevalent in modern advertising, there is a certain presupposition that perception is active while feeling is passive. Perception is the extra decision, intellectual act, that is added upon pure embodied feeling. This idea is often set in stone by fixing the duality of feminine embodiedness and masculine rationality. But what if we do not like such additive, black and white thinking? And what if we think that both perception and feeling are something more than just tools in our toolbox and more than parts of our feminine aspect? What if we are our body, and our body is itself a mode of attention, which includes a theoretical or contemplative moment? And what if attention is not just the turning of the spotlight to the correct information, but also includes a moment of genuine otherness and even wrongness? We often want to commit to a certain action because some psychological meme told us to do so, but the time isn't right, or the advice isn't even right for our context. We also often think that if we will follow some great advice, we will be saved forever. But there exists some deeper source of information that is tightly interwoven with the fabric of our perception and our body. There is a sort of bodily subjectivity which is primary, and in it you can already spot many traces of communication. We communicate already prelinguistically. Babies, for instance, are reported to communicate intensely with their faces in face-to-face exchanges before they reach 1 year of age. And older children are highly susceptible to facial cues when acquiring language. We are following a bidirectional pull, from body to language and from language to body. While philosophers often do not have a terrain or do not wish to have one to try out their speculations, dancers often do not possess linguistics or conceptual analysis skills which allow them to elaborate on their decisions critically. Generally, dancers are not theorists and vice versa. Maybe because a certain conception of choreography still implicitly separates the mind from the body. The choreographer as the arranger of bodies. But this is an old conception based in the old aesthetics which still thought of aesthesis as a formal act, not an embodied, material one. One of the nascent goals of our project is also to experiment with how the body can be inherently meaningful in different contexts, just by being in space, surrounded by different bodies, and being aware of itself as somehow layered and structured, and also being aware of the possible broadening and narrowing of the context, so as to include other human and non-human entities into this ever-developing constellation. We practiced and performed for the last year and a half in different settings, from studios to museums to forests, and in every space there was a different layering of impressions that set us into motion. But we also dealt with the question, what does it mean to treat the inside of the body, or the absent body, as a source of movement? Not only how do we dance from our inner organs, our fascia, but also how we dance from the invisible. Empathy is a hard problem for the modern world. In society, what ties us together generally is a common understanding of things, a certain conventionality, or a basic set of concepts. Absolutes like love and friendship would serve as a foundation for establishing something new. Merleau-Ponty would actually call this foundation the invisible. In times of societal chaos, concepts are up for interpretation, which is not necessarily bad, since new interpretations may emerge. Some people, mostly right-leaning, whatever that may mean, have lately said that humankind would be better off without empathy, since empathy offers us a very bad moral compass. While this seems counterintuitive for the state of the modern world, full of violence and chaos and living in small bubbles, it plays off of an actual shadow side of empathy, which some other people often neglect. Firstly, empathy has often been used as a handy excuse for enslaving other people. We know what's best for them. But it can also make us prone to inaction, since it implies a complete melding with the other's subjective experience. But there is also a strong case for empathy if we start from kinesthetic empathy, which is the ability to follow and strut along with other bodies in world's precarious settings. Wittgenstein has a great few passages where he discusses the verb to follow, about which he says that we wrongly take to imply an outside guidance. The guidance could be sometimes inner, sometimes outer, and sometimes it might come from the space between. We follow when we walk, we follow when we dance, we follow when we read, we follow the skin with our fingers. That doesn't always mean that we are tied to a certain set of patterns or interpretative tools, but the following is smooth and automatic and somehow logical. In our project, we deal with how we establish the basis of this following together. Following itself has a shadow side in following blindly. Not with eyes closed, blind. Girard in the previous century established that we often imitate others in their beliefs, styles, and patterns of behavior, which may result in groupthink, symbolic violence, and scapegoating. Where is the borderline between empathy and mimesis, or imitation, as Girard calls it? It seems quite thin, so maybe we should define empathy broader, as a capacity of identifying with others, but also individuating from others. This was actually a general idea of the Renaissance conception of love, which allegedly served as one of the bases for Newton's idea of gravity. The modern idea of empathy is derived from the 20th century aesthetics, already under the influence of the embodied approach, where it refers to the second stage of the aesthetic act, an act of absorbing the aesthetic object with feeling and attention, but also from psychoanalysis, where it refers to a certain depth of the unconscious. Nowadays, we live in a time in which, because of the prevalence of images and because of the speed of information sharing, everything unconventional quickly becomes conventional, and therefore nothing is actually conventional anymore. Memes are usually mere juxtapositions of intellectually uncontested images. Today's images are very strong. They often hook us to fear, shame, and guilt, where we are most prone to identify and buy. Therefore, we must find ways of thinking below and above our individual subjectivities. One way of doing that is thinking not in terms of demography, but in terms of multiplicity, how we exist together in different spaces and how we are conditioned by those spaces, spatially, but also politically. The other way of doing that is thinking in parts. how each of our bodily parts may adapt and respond to others in the most intricate of ways. There is no modern consensus on what a body is or what it can do. The body used to be conceived as a bag of fluids, then as a bunch of mechanical cogs, levers, and clutches. Only recently the question has been asked differently, in terms of the body's relation to space, time, and other bodies. Because this question is still unanswered, it is open to exploration. And our way of exploring it is from the bottom up, practicing attuning to each other and our surroundings, taking these as a plethora of different ways to come back together in a world that could make contact-free the norm.